Hey everybody, it is Myriad from Arkham.cards, and I wanted to make a couple of videos where I kind of do like a post-mortem podcast type of thing, in which I discuss the Ghost of Onigawa. Um, this is kind of like, I guess, sort of a developer diary kind of thing. If you're a fan of the Ghosts of Onigawa, or maybe just game design in Arkham in general, maybe this will be interesting to you. I kind of plan to sort of talk about my thoughts and goals and challenges and everything I was kind of thinking about as I was working on the Ghosts of Onigawa. This is going to be pretty free form. I haven't written anything down. So it might get a little rambly and scatterbrained, and I'm sorry for that. I think I'll split this into two videos. One where I talk mostly about the Investigator expansion, and then I'll do one where I talk mostly about the campaign expansion. I'm guessing the campaign expansion one will probably be significantly longer, because I'll probably want to talk about sort of the overall story and how the experience of designing it went, and then maybe even like drill down into each scenario and kind of talk about what's going on there and what I wanted to achieve with each. But today we'll probably just do the Investigator expansion, where we talk about the custom investigators and the player cards. I don't know if you should watch either of these if you haven't played the Ghosts of Onigawa, if you're intending to. Definitely in the campaign video, there's going to be spoilers about the campaign. I don't intend to talk much about the campaign in this video, but I suspect I will have to reference it, or it's just going to come up naturally. So I don't intend for this video to be a bunch of spoilery type of stuff, but if you have not yet played the Ghosts of Onigawa campaign, maybe wait to watch this until you've done that. Or if you don't care about spoilers, that's fine too. Because like I said, I don't intend to talk about a ton of spoilery stuff in this video, but I'm leaving the door open that it might come up, so you have been warned. Okay, well let's talk the Ghosts of Onigawa, and let's talk about the Investigator expansion. Where to even begin? I guess probably the best place to start is the Investigators. That's apt because they were really the first thing that I worked on when I was sort of trying to come up with the idea for what would be called the Ghosts of Onigawa. A fun fact is, before it was called the Ghost of Onigawa, it was called the Aperture of Infinity. You might have seen some references to that name if you've been digging through the raw Eon files in the GitHub. That the Aperture of Infinity is still on some of the file names in places, so that's what that is. And maybe I can just quickly talk about kind of the genesis of the concept even before we get into the Investigators. I think I mentioned in the campaign guide for Onigawa that the thing that made me start working on this is that I wanted to adapt the Fatal Frame series of video games into Arkham horror. I didn't really know what exactly that meant, but I'm a fan of Japanese horror, and I think the Fatal Frame games are pretty good examples of that. So I kind of started off with this idea about, well, there's going to be some little girls using a magical camera to take pictures of ghosts, and that's probably there's a fucking awesome standalone scenario that takes place in a haunted mansion and does all that. But when I kind of started writing, I guess I realized I wanted to do something a little more expansive than that and a little more cosmic-y horror than that. So I kind of was like, well, maybe this needs to be a full campaign size kind of a thing, and if that's the case, it probably can't all take place in one mansion, and we need a little bit more room, and maybe this is actually kind of a broader homage to general Japanese horror concepts and Japanese mythology at large and that kind of a thing, and so it kind of grew from that into what we now know Onigawa to be. And so all that's to say that when I started working on the investigators, because I decided pretty early on that I wanted to do a full cycle experience and not just give you a campaign and have that be it. Nothing against creators who do just give you a campaign. Making 100 new player cards is quite a lot of work, as it turns out, and not necessarily necessary. It doesn't necessarily make the campaign part any better. So I totally get why people don't do that. But yeah, I guess I wanted to really try and see if it was possible to imitate kind of a full Fantasy Flight cycle. And I think I got pretty close. Obviously, the whole Ghost of Onigawa package is not nearly as polished as an FFG cycle is, but I think it gets 90% of the way there, maybe, and that's pretty good. And hopefully, in future projects like the Sands of Memphis, or eventually if the Blood of Dracul ever materializes, I'll get closer each time, and if I can do that, I'll be happy. But yeah, so let's talk about these investigators. So once I kind of realized that this was a broader Japanese mythology kind of a thing and not just ghosts in a mansion, I started working on the investigators for the investigator expansion, and yeah, there's a lot to say, I think, not just about these investigators, but kind of investigators in Arkham as a general proposition. And just to be clear, nothing I say in any of these videos is me telling anybody how to do it. I don't know that there is one way or the right way to make Arkham stuff, but there are definitely ways that I think that are important to me. So just anything I say, just understand that that's just my opinion, man, and I think it's good for people to try other approaches, and then we can see, is that good or not? And if it is, great, and if it's not, then at least we ran the experiment and we know. So with that asterisk, I think for me, when it comes to investigators, it's important that you start from a strong concept, and that seems obvious, I guess, but for me what that means is, well, it's funny because like the subtitles on investigator cards are ostensibly like the least important part of the card, right? Because it has literally no rules implications whatsoever, what the investigator subtitle is. But in a weird way, I think for me it's actually the most important part, because what the subtitle does is establish sort of the archetype of the investigator, right? And to me, it's important that the investigator archetype be as kind of, I don't know, I guess general as possible. Like, I don't like it when people's custom investigators get too specific in the subtitle, but that just stands in for the concept. So, you could make an investigator with a subtitle like the wisecracking scoundrel or whatever, and like that's a fine character concept for a piece of fiction, but I don't think it makes a very good Arkham investigator, or at least it doesn't feel faithful to Arkham to me, because it isn't archetypal. It's too it's a little too descriptive when it needs to be more mythological, maybe, or like, yeah, not abstract, but like the subtitle needs to be, it needs to communicate a lot in a very little, and maybe not even communicate a lot. Maybe it just needs to create a large canvas for you, the player, to pour your own biases and priors onto. But so when I kind of realized, oh, this is a sort of Japanese-focused cycle, obviously there were a lot of archetypal character concepts that just sort of leapt out at me. You know, the ninja, the samurai, the geisha, and those are all, you know, very strong concepts that don't necessarily tell you anything about how to implement them in the concept of, or in the into like the Arkham system, but they're very rich, and we're all very familiar with them, and I think that's really important, is that you kind of start from that, and then think about, you know, what kind of mechanics best represent that concept, and then for me, it's really only at the end that I start worrying about balance. I'm very much more interested in sort of trying to accurately model concepts within the constraints of Arkham mechanics, and only after I'm like satisfied that the mechanic is well represented do I bother. Then you can, you know, go in and tweak the numbers and figure out, oh, is this too good or too bad or whatever. So that's kind of my approach. And yeah, I didn't have to work very hard to find these sort of character concepts, just because most of them are so iconic. I guess Akira's kind of the standout, although I think the place that I started from with him was actually kind of equally as ubiquitous as the rest. I just didn't do a super great job kind of manifesting that in his design, but we can talk about him a little bit later. Why don't we start with Yuki, who I don't know that she is my favorite investigator from Onigawa. I certainly treat her like she's my favorite, in that she gets a lot of special attention in the campaign. I don't think it's a spoiler to say that if you take Yuki into the Ghost of Onigawa campaign, she kind of gets a series of story beats that are specific to her, and even gets kind of involved in the events of the story in a specific way. That's all I'll say about that for now. And yeah, Yuki for me was, I think, part of the reason why she became so tightly interwoven with the Onigawa campaign. Well, in retrospect, everything that happens to Yuki and Onigawa probably should have just happened to Mayu, but I had the character concept for the Shrine Maiden pretty early, and you can see now in the final version that has been that was a little bit too specific in my mind, so I kind of took a step back from that and was like, okay, what is a Shrine Maiden? I'm not sure I even actually understand what a Shrine Maiden is, but I have seen a good amount of media in which a Shrine Maiden is represented. But stepping back from that, I realized that that's kind of a priestess concept, and I did that with Makoto too. She's not the geisha, she's the courtesan, which I think is a better representation of kind of the archetypal root of geisha. But anyway, Yuki, I think the only reason she is why the Onigawa campaign is so obsessed with her is because I became really obsessed with her, because the idea of the Shrine Maiden kind of sparked a lot of what would eventually manifest in the campaign. I definitely did not start off Onigawa thinking, okay, Yuki is going to be a key player in the events of the campaign. It really wasn't until later that I realized that I kind of wanted her to be. And I think the reason that I became kind of fixated on that was sort of while trying to unpack the Shrine Maiden concept, I hit on a number of ideas that seemed like they needed to be a focal point of the story and the experience and the mechanics and that kind of a thing. Again, I'm not sure I have a full understanding of what a Shrine Maiden is in sort of either in ancient Japanese culture or modern day, to whatever extent they still exist. But to me, what is interesting about the Shrine Maiden character is that we don't really, in the West, I don't think we really have a good, like an analogous concept. I mean, I guess a Shrine Maiden is in some sense a Japanese nun, right? And we do, in fact, have a nun in Arkham. We do have Sister Mary, and I do think that there are parallels between Yuki and Sister Mary, both in the sense that they mechanically interact with bless tokens, but I find Yuki much more compelling than Sister Mary for some reason, and maybe that reason is just because I've spent a lot of time thinking about Shrine Maidens, and so I guess in my conceptualization, what is interesting about Shrine Maidens is that there is a recurring or an ineffable theme of sacrifice. And obviously, if you played the Ghosts of Onigawa, you know that idea is present throughout, and in fact the entire concept kind of hinges on this idea of sacrifice, both in kind of a literal sense, but in a metaphorical, I guess literary sense, I would say, because what is a Shrine Maiden? It is a young girl who is called to a certain vocation. Again, I don't take anything I'm about to say as like factual. This is just kind of my interpretation and impression of it, as a Westerner who really doesn't know anything about Japanese culture other than what I have sort of fleetingly observed from various anime and video games. But in my mind, it is a young girl who is sort of brought up, not necessarily against her will, but it isn't something that she wasn't like a regular person who chose to become a Shrine Maiden. It was someone who was brought up specifically to take on this vocation, and she, in a very real sense, sacrifices her freedom and individuality and life, really. Like, she doesn't get to do what she wants to do. She has to undergo this fairly elaborate training and these sort of ritual-oriented activities in order to one day kind of take on this mantle of Shrine Maiden, where she becomes responsible for tending the shrine, whatever that means, depending on the historical context. And that's very interesting to me, because it sounds like kind of like a bad thing, right? Like, it sounds like not a lot of fun and like something you would do to punish somebody, but the Shrine Maidens that I have seen depicted are not under duress. They are kind of voluntarily accepting this responsibility, and kind of bearing that nobly, and us, onlookers witnessing that, I think are supposed to be kind of bolstered by it. I've never spoken to a shrine maiden, so I don't know how they view what they do in terms of like as being a public service or whatever. But that's how it feels from the outside looking in, I think. And the sacrifice thing is interesting because it's always a young, beautiful girl, right? You're not when you think of a shrine maiden, you don't think of a nun. You don't think of a stern older woman who is sort of detached from the pleasures of life. You think of someone young and full of life and beauty. And in a real sense, I think it is not only that she is sacrificing her what else she might do with her life, her other destiny or her other fate to take on this vocation, but we as bystanders or onlookers, we are sacrificing her to that. Because we don't get to otherwise enjoy her as we normally would a young, beautiful woman. She is kind of removed from society in a sense to go and adopt this higher calling, and that means more if she is young and beautiful, just based on humanity's values. And so that I found all that, just thinking that through, to be really compelling, and that seemed really important in a way that I couldn't immediately translate into mechanics necessarily. But I think that my obsession with that idea is kind of what led to Yuki becoming so important to the story. And I guess I also felt like I didn't know when I started that shrine maidens were going to be a thing in the Onigawa story, and by the time I sort of had gotten to the point where I had invented the Stewards of August and the shrine maiden breeding program and all that kind of stuff, at that point I was kind of like, well, it's too much of a coincidence that one of the investigators is a shrine maiden. Like I felt like I needed to pay that off somehow. I'm not sure I did it in the best way possible in the end, but I felt forced, to be brutally honest. Like I felt like fate demanded it, and I just kind of went along with it. I don't regret it a ton, but I think knowing what I know now, I probably would have done it differently and foisted more of Yuki's arc onto Mayu, but I guess that would be a risk because depending on how things go in the campaign for you and what choices you make, you may not always have Mayu. So yeah, Yuki conceptually is definitely the one that I spent the most time thinking about, and I think she really informed a lot of sort of the Onigawa mythos and tone a lot. I don't think she is like my favorite. I don't think she's objectively the best designed investigator. But if you're an Onigawa enjoyer, we do owe her a lot. Just because sort of representing a fairly, in my opinion, sort of nuanced and complicated character archetype that caused me to think about things that I had not planned to think about going into it. So I do love Yuki for that reason. Onigawa would not be what it is without her. I mean, it might be better without her. I don't know. But if you do like what is there, we owe a lot of that to the time I spent thinking about Yuki. Maybe we'll deal with the kind of the signatures and the nitty gritty of the actual mechanics with her after I kind of talk about some of the Gator concepts. Why don't we talk about Makoto? Makoto is, I think, the investigator that I feel most conflicted about. I feel in some ways like I failed Makoto. She got the most changes in Return to Onigawa, and I think that was me trying to set the wrong things right. And I don't know that I did that, and I think part of the reason why I don't know if I did that is because I'm not sure I had the concept right at kind of a baseline level. But I guess before we talk about Makoto specifically, maybe we should talk about the courtesan as an archetype. So I knew very early that one of the investigators was going to be a geisha, and I needed to figure out what that meant. And so in thinking through, what is a geisha, there were a couple of paths I wandered down. I think one way you could go with the geisha concept is prostitute. I didn't go that way for a couple of reasons. I don't even think I didn't in her lore even imply that she had sex for money. I'm not taking that off the table. In my mind, sex is part of it's a tool in her arsenal, but I definitely don't think of her as like, she's not standing on the street corner hooking. She's like a high class escort, let's say, that is exclusively her clientele is exclusively the rich and powerful. I think that's however you might feel about sex work, and believe me, I'm sympathetic if you view that dimly, and I'm also sympathetic if you view that as an unfortunate but perhaps necessary consequence of capitalism. So I'm not judging anybody, and I hope you will grant me the leeway to kind of play in this area, uncomfortable though it may be. But yeah, so but I also think that's kind of inescapably bound up with the geisha concept. You have to at least address that if you're going to create an authentic feeling geisha character. I don't know that I did that, but I definitely thought a lot about it. But yeah, I didn't want to just make a prostitute investigator. Because our FFG's kind of concept of the Lovecraftian mythos is decidedly asexual, and there's wisdom to that. I don't want to think about what playing the Innsmouth cycle would be like if it wasn't completely non-sexual. But I will say that sex is definitely, I think, maybe not should, but can be involved in the cosmic horror soup. And I do have some future plans along those lines, but that's a whole other story. We don't need to get into that right now. But sort of to remain faithful to FFG's vision, I didn't want to make Makoto sort of not even hyper-sexualized, because obviously I don't have a ton of problem with that if you've seen Sakura's artwork and wrote me emails about how mad it makes you. But I didn't really want to try to mechanically represent that. Just I'm not sure it's a good idea, and B, I also thought it was kind of short-changing the geisha concept, to be honest, because I think there's a lot of other things going on there. I think there was a version of Makoto which was like an entirely support-based investigator. I think she was either the survivor or the mystic at one point during design. But I decided that I didn't want to make her a full-blown support character. We already kind of have Carolyn filling that role, and to be honest, Carolyn might be my least favorite investigator. Not because I don't like her concept. Actually, think her concept is very strong, and I like a lot of the lore surrounding Carolyn. I just don't find support in Arkham to be that fun to play. So I guess it's purely for selfish reasons. I didn't go down that road, but I also thought it was kind of a cop out, or that it wasn't necessary. I'm not sure that it's. I think there's more to the geisha concept than that. Let's just say. So I tried to think about, what are where is the geisha's power, let's say? Like, what makes them strong? And when I was thinking about that, one thing that came to mind pretty much right away is that one of my favorite anime properties when I was growing up was this anime called Rurouni Kenshin, which maybe you've seen if you're an anime enjoyer. It's about samurais and that kind of a thing. What it made me think of in particular from that is there's like a 4-episode OVA that's kind of related to that. It's sort of a prequel to the Rurouni Kenshin anime. I think in America it was localized as Samurai X, Trust and Betrayal. I think that's the subtitle for it. And I really like that 4-episode OVA. Even if you don't like anime, I would recommend you go watch the Samurai X OVAs. They're very good. If you're not familiar with it, the OVA is sort of a prequel to the anime series and kind of tells you the origins of the protagonist from the anime. And it's about a young boy who is sort of orphaned at a young age and is taken under the wing of a master swordsman who tries to kind of teach him about swordsmanship and honor. But all this is kind of going on during the Japanese Revolution. And so the boy kind of becomes disenchanted with his master's philosophical teachings and is like, I want to go fight in the war. We got to save the oppressed people who are, struggling under the boot of the shogunate. And his master, tries to explain that, you're young and stupid and you're going to get used if you just go down there. It's not, you think you'll be helping people, but you'll just be killing people, and it's going to get bad, but the boy doesn't listen, and sort of ends up becoming recruited by a revolutionary faction that's trying to overthrow the shogunate, and they kind of turn him into a weapon. And he becomes a very skilled assassin, but kind of loses his humanity in the process. And I mention all that just because one of the things that the character's master does is sort of recruits this geisha-like woman and installs him into the assassin boy's life, and kind of gives her the instruction like, hey, I need you to like love him and like kind of be his anchor and his rock so that he doesn't forget his humanity and kind of remembers what he's fighting for and all that kind of stuff. Of course, because it's a drama, she eventually dies, and him having loved her kind of, his grief kind of makes him an even bigger monster. But I think that's really like an overlooked thing. Even within the context of this story and just in life in general, but in the anime, most of the big things that are happening are being done by men. Men are going to war and they're having secret meetings and politically scheming and all that kind of stuff. But there are several times in which the important men are shown going home to their wives or consorts and laying their heads in their laps while their consorts, read poetry or play their little lute or whatever. And there's something really important about that. Maybe if you consider yourself like a feminist or something, you would have a problem with those sorts of depictions as women being more like passive or in a caretaker role or whatever. But and fair enough. I'm not here to argue about that, but I do think that at least in that story, and also in reality, but specifically in that story, they go to specific lengths to sort of emphasize like how vital that caretaking is. Like yes, it is sort of a stereotypical gender role that falls to women or whatever, and maybe that's unjust, and fair enough if you think that, but nonetheless, it is vital work. Somebody has to be taking care of the people who have to make hard decisions and do hard things, whether that's literally murder people or run a revolution or whatever. And so I thought a lot about the geisha character from Samurai X. I think her name is Tomoe. While I was sort of thinking about what would eventually become Makoto, and I felt like, though there is perhaps a lot problematic about the geisha concept, there is strength, I think, built into that character concept. And trying to think about why is Makoto strong, and thinking about, well, what is good about being a geisha? And it's like, well, you probably get a lot of access to very powerful people, and you probably see and hear things that are, quote unquote, above your station, and that's when it kind of started to coalesce for me as like there's power in being the consort kind of a thing. Like, you may not be the center of attention or the center of the story, but that doesn't mean that you are passive, weak, and stupid. It just means sort of the power that you have is understated, perhaps, and maybe not appreciated by certain people who think about power in a certain way or whatever. But all that's to say, that kind of helped me hone in on this idea of her kind of being a consort for the rich and wealthy, and that kind of gives her financial wealth, but also kind of hones her skill for being a confidant, because that is a skill. It's easy to just sort of think of it as like being a good listener and think that's something basically anybody can do, but I can tell you from firsthand experience, it is very hard to find people who are actually good listeners. And I think of Makoto as the world's best listener, in every sense, both that she sort of can understand what people are actually trying to say, and in the sense that she can advise them intelligently. And then once I kind of thought she's the world's best counselor, I started thinking about, well, how can that be true? And that kind of helped me figure out what her signature should be, which we'll talk about in a minute. But so that was one kind of avenue I went down while thinking about Makoto. Another avenue that I kind of thought of, sort of parallel to this, was like, what are seekers scared of? And I think most of them, you would agree, the worst thing that can happen to them when they're trying to run around and get clues is an enemy shows up. And I felt like there was some obvious, let's say, symmetry between that tension and her ability to profitably interact with very powerful and dangerous people as part of her profession, let's say. And so that kind of union is what led me to conclude, okay, maybe Makoto is a seeker who doesn't mind there being enemies around. And that's kind of where we start to get into her mechanics, which we'll talk more about in a bit. But yeah, like I said, I feel now somewhat conflicted about what Makoto ultimately turned out to be. I think my ambitions for her were greater than my actual skills, so I just really wasn't able to fully realize the vision for her in the way that I hoped. But there is still a lot that I like about her. I think she is a very strong character concept, and yeah, I'm pretty happy with her. All things said, I think she could be even better than she is, but my hope is that if you play Makoto, you find her interesting to play as compared to other Seekers, and enjoy the sort of alternate approach to enemies being around, which is, I think, normally if you're a Seeker, it's always bad. But Makoto kind of finds a way to benefit from it, which is, yeah, I think a kind of a good way to realize the geisha idea without kind of resorting to she's just a whore, So yeah, I hope that kind of my respect for Makoto has come through. I don't conceptualize. There's a reason she's not the prostitute; she's the courtesan, and I think that is a significant distinction. Yeah. Okay. Well, let's move on to Hideki. Hideki is probably my favorite investigator from the cycle. He emerged pretty much fully formed from my brain from the word go. I don't think I've made really any changes to Hideki since I first designed him. From a balance standpoint, he might be slightly too powerful. If we were able to objectively grade every Arkham investigator, he might be in the overpowered tier. But I actually don't mind that. My goals for the ninja concept were very clear immediately to me. I wanted to make a agility focused fighter who could be your primary monster slayer, and not feel like, fuck, I should have just probably played a guardian or whatever. Because there's a lot of kind of fun tricks in the rogue card pool related to fighting, but I feel like you don't really get the most out of them if you're playing a flex rogue, and I think Tony Morgan is a great primary fighter. He is definitely overpowered, so I kind of wanted to give you a second, something not as broken as Tony, but still formidable, still something that felt like you weren't just gimping yourself by not having played a Guardian. And so make evasion great again was kind of my motto when I was thinking about Hideki. And yeah, I think the ninja concept, I don't think I have a lot of interesting ideas to say. I think a ninja speaks for itself. You want a fast guy who is sneaky and can kill stuff and throws shurikens, and all of that was realized in the Ghosts of Onigawa Investigator expansion. So if I did one thing right, it might be Hideki. Again, I recognize he may be slightly stronger than where he could be or whatever, but I'm okay with that. I don't really have any regrets about Hideki. I think he came together very well very early, and I've been pleased at some of the feedback I've gotten about him with people's experience playing him. And yeah, when I play through the Ghosts of Onigawa, if I want to use the Onigawa investigators, Hideki is always very tempting for me, and so I hope you have a good time if you play with him. But yeah, I don't think I have a ton of interesting stuff to say about him. I will say that his stat lines vexed me perpetually. I couldn't figure out, like, in trying to represent the character Hideki Honda, I think, like, to actually represent how I feel his stats are, I think he's more like a 3.344. But that's simply that's just broken. So I had to kind of dock him. I think he is definitely smarter than a 2 intellect would suggest. I think maybe the 2 willpower could be informed by kind of the stuff going on in his story where he's sort of under the yoke of the syndicate and has all this kind of guilt about the rest of his clan. But yes, there were that was one thing that changed several times with Hideki, was like, how do I move these stats around to be faithful to the character? And I guess that is one place where I feel like it's not perfect. But I guess I don't know how to make it perfect without making it broken. You know what I mean? From like a balance standpoint. I guess he could be like 2.344 and then maybe have worse health and sanity than normal, and maybe that would be an okay compromise. But I also don't think of him as a weak physical specimen, so I don't know that works either. So I think if anything, my biggest problem with Hideki was just like, this character is, the concept for the character is too good. So I had to sort of install some artificial gimpness to him that isn't really informed by the lore, just to make him not completely broken. But so yeah, it's always unfortunate when you feel like you have to make that sort of compromise. But yeah, looking at him now, I don't think I would change anything. We can talk about his signatures a bit later. I'm gonna skip over Akira for right now, and we'll come back to him. And I'll go just because I think he's kind of the odd man out of this bunch in a couple of ways. So I'm just gonna talk about Sakura next. Sakura, lovely Sakura. She is probably the one that has gone through the most revisions of sort of the 5 main investigators from Onigawa. The samurai concept, was one of the first things I thought of, and I knew there was going to be a samurai. There was some question about whether a samurai ought to be a rogue or a guardian, and I think I ended on Survivor, and I'm not sure if that was the right decision. I mean, I think you could shuffle these guys around in a way where, like, maybe Hideki was the survivor, and maybe Yuki was a seeker, and maybe Makoto was a rogue, and that would free up Sakura to be a guardian. I thought about that kind of stuff a lot, but I think I ended up settling on Survivor for Sakura, not just because it starts with an S, although I do greatly appreciate that. I think for me it was more about, like, being on her own, being a wanderer, being resourceful, and I knew that I could kind of give her access to the stuff in the card pool that I wanted her to have, as kind of her secondary. So I think it worked out. I think I'm okay with it. Obviously, being heavily dependent on spirit events means she's kind of a guardian, but even though she doesn't technically have any guardian access. And yeah, I did, when thinking about, how to represent a samurai, the temptation to make her signature be a sword was obviously very strong, and I didn't end up doing that. And I'm not sure if that was the right move or not. There's obviously, you could obviously make a signature for her that is very cool sword, and has special abilities that let you do various things, but I decided against that, because I knew there was going to be a sword in the player card pool, because I kind of wanted Hideki to have access to that too, and and B, I didn't want the focus to be on her sword. I wanted the focus to be on her. And what that kind of meant for me was for focusing more on, what is the purpose of a sword? What are you using the sword for? Originally, very early on, when I was working on the Onigawa player cards, I was going to have two new traits, ninjutsu and bushido, and Hideki was going to have access to all ninjutsu cards, and Sakura was going to have access to all bushido cards. And then I kind of realized, oh, that's just what spirit is. So I ended up kind of scrapping that and just making all of the cards that used to be ninjutsu and bushido spirit, because why fix what isn't broke? And obviously the comparisons to Nathaniel are pretty, it's hard to escape that. And I did kind of like the idea of having another spirit event focused investigator, that, because Nathaniel is very strong. I like Nathaniel a lot. I actually enjoy playing as Nathaniel because I kind of like the weird kind of rhythmic tempo of that boxing gloves provides for him. But I also kind of wanted to see what would spirit cards look like outside of the boxing gloves, in a way to kind of make up the difference, I guess, in efficiency with that is kind of why she has the ability that she does, where it's an economy thing, and I think that kind of plays into Survivor, because I think there's obviously a Sakura Dark Horse build in there somewhere if you want to go that route. But yeah, I don't know that I have a ton of interesting things to say about the samurai archetype other than that. I think it is well represented, though she does not have a cool sword as her signature. I kind of like the live by the sword, die by the sword idea. I think her character, I'm a little disappointed in, to be honest. I just don't think it's well defined, I guess. Her lore mostly talks about how she was raised and why she became a wanderer, but not really about like what kind of person she is. And really all you have to go on is her flavor text, which kind of implies that she's sort of a murderer. and yeah, I don't think that's I think she's no stranger to defending herself when trouble arises, but this does seem a little more sinister than that. So yeah, I guess if I have a regret about Sakura, it's that I just didn't kind of define her as well as I would have liked. And maybe that's good in the sense that it leaves you as the player more room to kind of paint the canvas. But I think she deserves better than what I gave her, and I do somewhat regret that. But overall, I'm pretty happy with Sakura. I think mechanically, the main idea I had for her is I wanted there to be a combat-focused survivor who could be your main monster killer in the way that Hideki was for rogues, and I think she's pretty darn good at killing. Yeah, I haven't really thought about where these custom investigators kind of land on the tier list of Arkham Gators or anything, but sounds like people are having an okay time with Sakura being their primary fighter, so in that sense, mission accomplished. I guess I do have to talk about the one controversy with Sakura, which is that some people have not appreciated the art I have chosen for Sakura, which kind of surprised me, and I guess kind of doesn't. I guess I should just elaborate in case you don't understand what I'm talking about. But I've gotten several pieces of feedback from people who are unhappy with Sakura's art, and their complaint is that It's too provocative, let's say. They think it's too booby. I think is the phrase I have received from a couple of people. And somebody even once tried to convince me that there is visible nipple on Sakura's card art, and I actually don't think that's true. Let's really zoom in here. I mean, I'm not dying on this hill. I had not ever thought that there was nipple visible on Sakura's art until this person said it. And I mean, there is a shadow, a drop shadow with her chest bandages, which maybe it could be the edge of an areola, I guess, or it could just be the drop shadow from the bandages. I think it says, I mean, I literally never saw that in all of the time I spent looking at this card, so part of me is like, well, if you're seeing nipple, I think that says more about you than me. But my intention was not to make Sakura hypersexual or anything like that. I mean, it's certainly not in her character anywhere, and that's not how I have ever thought of her. But I guess I just really liked this piece of art. I think it's very well done. But I guess the art I chose for her signature kind of bears that out, because that is quite booby, and fair enough. If you don't like that, I'm sorry. I don't think this. I genuinely do not think this is explicit in any way. If, Arkham is a game that you play with your kids or whatever, hey, I'm not sure that's a great idea, but if you are, and don't like that Sakura's cleavage is so ample, I did make an alternate art for her, which is much more modest, let's say. I do like this art also, and honestly, if I had known that the response to the Sakura art was going to be contentious, I probably would have just gone with this as the main art. But I actually don't agree with a lot of the criticism I have gotten regarding Sakura's art. Like, if you don't like the art, that's fine. That's valid. I mean, that's not even something we can argue about. That's your opinion, and you're welcome to have it. But I would say some of the criticism of Sakura's art has been more than just people sharing opinions. It has been more accusatory, like I've done something wrong, and I fundamentally do not agree with that. So yeah, I didn't want to sort of capitulate to feedback that I thought was incorrect. So I guess I've split the difference. And if this is your Sakura, great. I think this is a great Sakura. I didn't like make a bad Sakura to be pouty about it. I think this is also a good Sakura. But this is the one that is truer to my vision of her, but you don't have to give a shit about that. You can play with the other one if you want. That's totally fine. I genuinely don't care. I do care a little bit that people's reactions have surprised me and frustrated me a little bit. But and trust me, when I feel like overall I went through great pains to make sure that the Ghost of Onigawa did not get horny, and there were many moments in which it could have gotten horny. Like I felt like there was raw material there to support horniness. But overall, I feel as though I showed great restraint. But if you don't agree, if you think I got too horny with Sakura's art and maybe some of the enemy arts, just you wait, because I've got a concept for a cycle that's gonna make the Ghosts of Onigawa look like Sunday school. So look out for that. But yeah, I think we can move on from Sakura for now. We'll talk about her signatures later too. Okay, let's talk about Akira. I should say up front, I hate mystics. I don't like playing them. I don't like designing cards for them. I hate how the mystic design philosophy seems to be give them 5 willpower and then whatever on the other stats. Like, I don't like it. But the concept for Akira was unambiguously mystic. I needed a mystic, and I felt like the concept for it was really strong, which was basically just, kind of being a Japanese spirit mage, which is sometimes referred to as onmyoji. I think there's like a free-to-play game called that or something. I think the first time I ever heard of onmyoji was in the Neo games, which I like a great deal. So this idea of a spirit summoning mage was pretty compelling to me right from the jump. And it was really a question of like, how do I show that? And for me, it became a problem. There was immediately obvious tension for me between kind of the mechanical implementation of that and the sort of lore of the character. Like, I really liked the idea of him having sort of access to sorry, Sakura, I didn't mean to flip you. Of him having access to the genetic memory of his antecedents, and that sort of giving him a kind of a cheat code into talking to dead people. And that I think was really the concept. Is I wanted, hence the medium. And I remember being shocked when I was thinking of his what I would do for his subtitle. I think it might have been the sorcerer or something like that at first, and then as I kind of honed in on, he talks to dead people, I couldn't believe that Arkham Horror did not have the medium as one of its investigator archetypes. That was shocking to me. And so as soon as I realized that, I was like, okay, well, it's my time to shine. I'm not sure if I actually ended up shining with this investigator, but yeah. So I felt like there was just too much going on, I guess, with kind of the character idea, which was like, he talks to dead people. Can he summon ghosts? And I didn't really end up doing anything with that. I instead tried to focus more on like, and then if you're gonna do he talks to dead people, that kind of beggars a drudge mechanic for this investigator, right? But maybe that doesn't have anything to do with like summoning spirits or whatever, right? So I just felt like there was a lot of facets to this character, and I just couldn't get them all into one investigator in Arkham. As I'm recording this, it's the day that Fantasy Flight released Parallel Jim, who is really eating my lunch. I feel like is new, so I haven't had a lot of time to sort of digest Parallel Jim and see how I feel about him. He seems at first glance to be too complicated, but having said that, I also am like, damn, that's what I wanted Akira to do. So I guess I'm just salty that the professionals thought of it better than I did, but good for them. But yeah, so I think in a perfect world, Akira really would have just been Parallel Jim, but that didn't exist yet, and this is my first time making Arkham Investigator, so I didn't know you could do something that complicated. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, the concept didn't quite deliver, I didn't deliver on the concept. Let me be a little more, take some responsibility for my own work. But I have been, and again, my hatred to Mystics kind of interferes me from doing anything good with Mystics. I feel like I'm always the even in the player cards, which we'll get to at some point. Hopefully, I feel like I always have the hardest time coming up with Mystic cards because I'm like, I don't know what Mystics want, you know. But I think Akira might be the most popular investigator from the cycle, paradoxically, or at least he's the one that I've gotten the most positive feedback about. People seem to like playing as him. He seems to be pretty powerful, maybe, is the problem. Maybe he is too powerful, and if I had done a better job designing him and got his power under control, maybe people wouldn't like him so much. But I do think at the end of the day, kind of the Drudge thing is working for him. And I fucking love the art. Akira's art is mwah, it's so good. So I'm really happy I got to use it. And I'm a bad designer because art choices drive so much of of what I do in Arkham. I would have done anything to get that art onto a card. Fortunately, it's sort of related to what Akira was trying to do anyway, so it just kind of worked out. But yeah, big shout out to Celestial Fang, whose art I think I've featured in several of my Arkham projects. He's a great artist, or she. I don't know if it's a man or a woman. Sorry, could be either. But yeah, I think even accepting that Akira is pretty powerful, I don't ever feel tempted to play him. Mostly because I just don't like Mystics that much, so Akira's kind of my redheaded stepchild. But I'm glad to see that other people have loved him, and I hope that you will too, because I can't. Okay, well, this is getting a little bit long, so maybe we'll just talk about the investigator signatures and then do all the player cards in another video. Okay, well, let's head back over to Yuki, and maybe we can go through her mechanics a little bit. So I would say overall, one thing that I really wanted to do with the Onigawa card pool, just as a general proposition, was I want to enable more bless stuff happening, particularly at level 0. It's like, unless you're playing Sister Mary, it's pretty hard to do anything with bless at level 0, which is a shame because I have a Zoe Holy Spear concept deck that I've been trying to get working for as long as Innsmouth came out, really. Is I've been like, oh well, that's the obvious investigator I want to do bless stuff is Zoe, and it's just too hard to do with the limited bless support in the vanilla card pool, I feel like. So I knew I was going to want to make a lot of bless focus cards for Guardians at level 0. And that kind of led me to, well, it would be good if Yuki can take advantage of that, especially given that she has some divine stuff going on in her concept. So right, the question really wasn't what is Yuki's power going to be. It was going to be in what way does she interact with bless tokens, and I would have loved it to have just been a clone of Sister Mary's ability, and I feel like that's really what it should have been, but I didn't want to just do that again. So I tried to think of, well, if there's going to be a lot of ways, or at least more ways at level 0 for her to get bless in the bag, maybe she doesn't need to be blessing the bag herself. Maybe she just needs to benefit from the bag having been blessed. And so an easy way to do that was to just give her a card draw. I think one thing that I might have screwed up with in Yuki is there was clearly raw material for a more kind of yin-yang dualism thing going on. I mean, it's there in parts, like the tension between Apotheosis and Succession for the body slots, the ability triggering on bless tokens, the Elder Sign effect helping you banish curses. That same duality is present on Apotheosis, and it is also on Succession. So elements of that are present, but not in kind of a holistic way. when I was designing Yuki, there was not such a thing as harmony tokens, and there wouldn't be for at least a year. But if I could go back and do things over, I might give her access to the ability to craft harmony tokens out of blessing curse tokens or something along those lines. I think that's a little more mechanically. I feel like it capitalizes on the light and dark tension going on, both in her lore and in the actual mechanics of her cards and that kind of a thing. And maybe Apotheosis and the Succession should just be one card with two sides that flips or something like that. I think that would actually probably go a long way, but I also think it's okay as it is. So let's talk about Apotheosis. Like I said, I didn't want to just give her Sister Mary's printed ability, but you could also just put a slightly worse version of it on her signature. So I thought that was a good compromise, and I think Apotheosis is basically a perfectly realized version of the concept I was going for, which was, her kind of reaching her full potential as an ambassador of divinity, and not only sort of shaping the world through that in terms of generating blessed tokens, but also becoming stronger and more resilient to the perils of life, which is why it has sanity and health on it. I guess there is an outstanding question about do her signatures need to take up body slots, and I honestly don't know. I mean, what does that functionally do for her? It kind of locks her out of backpack, I guess, and bandolier, and she has mystic access, right? Yeah, so she can't take like Living Ink or Astral Mirror, I guess. And that's interesting. I mean, I guess you can still take those. You just risk getting successioned if you do. And yeah, Scarlet Keys was either not out yet when version 1 of Onigawa was released, or it had just come out. I actually can't remember, but so I wasn't really thinking about Living Ink and Astral Mirror at the time. I think I was mostly thinking about Bandolier and Backpack, and not really and sort of Enchanted Armor. I don't think Enchanted Armor is very good, so I'm not that broken up that it's not good for her to take it. But I guess I think why I wanted it to have body slot interactions is that Yuki's. Well, I wanted the weakness too, for sure, because Yuki's bodily autonomy that's an important theme in her character, in my opinion, both in the sense that, like, Shrine Maidens kind of give up a certain level of autonomy, but, well, we'll talk about it more when I get to the campaign portion of this podcast, but the Stewards of August were kind of creeps, and I intentionally did not make any explicit reference to sexual violence in the Ghosts of Onigawa, as far as I can remember, but I definitely hinted at it in some places, I think. Whether you picked up on that or not, I guess will determine is dependent on what kind of sicko you are. But and if you didn't pick up on any of that, I'm sorry to have installed that in your mind. It's certainly not something I am making light out of, but I think it's also, well, it's a too serious part of reality not to just pretend it doesn't exist or whatever. And so I'm actually pretty pleased at how I was able to thread that needle in terms of, like, suggesting it without coming out and saying it. But in my mind, the Stewards of August, just before their fall, were extremely corrupt and were mistreating their shrine maidens in a whole variety of ways. And so Yuki's body is an important piece of her challenge, I guess. And I did want to mechanically represent that to some extent. Again, not just in the sexual violence aspect, but also in the kind of sacrificial aspect that's built into her vocation. And yeah, so I think the succession will always take up the body slot, and then the only question is, does Apotheosis have it or not? And I guess the argument for that is, it creates some tension between her weakness and her signature in a way that I kind of like. But also, I think sort of thematically, it represents kind of maybe a freedom from worldly possession type of thing. And so yeah, it's weird, and I think the rules as written do let you get rid of the succession by playing Apotheosis over top of it. And maybe that's a good reason to take Astral Mirror and Living Ink, is it gives you more ways to defang the signature weakness. I actually hadn't thought of that until this very moment. So let's pretend I did. Let's pretend I'm a really clever designer and I think of things like that. But honestly, I hadn't. And yeah, it's sort of... I really like Yuki's signatures. Not because of what they mechanically do, but because I think they are well realized concepts for her personal strengths and her personal challenges, right? Like, this is the traumatic event that happened to her and shaped her into the kind of person that she is. And this is her ultimate destiny that she needs to reach despite this, right? And yeah, since Yuki was kind of one of the first things I worked on while designing the cycle, this kind of dichotomy, thinking about shrine maidens and this kind of stuff, really put a lot of ideas in my head that would ultimately shape the direction of the entire campaign, really. And so yeah, I look on these fondly. I don't know that Apotheosis is super strong. I mean, having the blessed drip is of course good, and taking the curses out, that I guess that can be either good or bad depending on who's on your team, but it is a reaction, so you can always forgo it if you don't want to. But enough of the Onigawa scenarios do put curses in the bag that even if you're not doing anything with curses, this will become useful for you. And I think that one thing I do really like about the succession is that if you think about it, it's kind of a reworked version of Sister Mary's weakness, which I think is called Crisis of Faith, right? I hate Crisis of Faith so much. And now that the taboo says you can't deny existence all of Crisis of Faith, I don't think I'm going to play Sister Mary ever again. But I think Succession is a way to achieve essentially what Crisis of Faith is trying to achieve, like replace all the blessed with curses, but do it in a way that isn't such a brutal swing, either in terms of bag math or in terms of you just had to take 10 horror. So I do like that a lot. Maybe looking at it now, maybe it needs double action to test it away, or maybe it needs to test a higher difficulty. And I guess there is kind of the problem that it can just whiff if you're not putting any blesses in the bag. But I guess that's another argument for why it needs to have a body slot, so that it actually does something, i.e. Takes away Apotheosis or whatever other bag or body slot you might be using. Yeah, so on the whole, I would say I'm pretty happy with Yuki's signatures. I think they do a better job from a fluff standpoint than they do from a mechanical standpoint, but that I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily. I guess I do sort of lament that I didn't sort of more fully realize kind of a yin-yang dualism concept with them that was more tightly interwoven. I do think there is some of that tension there in the current design, but it's not as intentional and not as, I guess, sophisticated as I might have liked it to be. But overall, I'm happy with Yuki. Yuki has given me a lot. Working on Yuki has done a lot for me, both as a designer and for the end product that is the Ghost of Onigawa. So I feel a lot of gratitude towards Yuki, and I look on her investigator card and her signatures fondly. There are maybe some small changes I would make to all of them, starting from scratch now. I guess we can talk about her card pool a little bit. So obviously she has all Guardians, she has all Blessed, which is interesting. I gave everybody a trait or two in the case of Makoto. We'll talk about Makoto's card pool in a second, but everybody got a trait and an off class, and there I have had some people discuss with me, is that too much? And the answer is I don't know. It's tempting to compare one investigator's card pool access to another and be like, well, this investigator has access to more cards, so that makes them unbalanced. But that's not a holistic view of an investigator, in my opinion. So it may be that Yuki's unbalanced, but I don't think you can say that just looking at her deck building options. I think you have to also consider, her stats, her signatures, her special ability, all that kind of stuff. And yeah, I don't think that having access to a bigger card pool can ever break an investigator. Like, at the end of the day, you're still limited to 30 cards, or 2 copies of 15 cards. And yeah, it might be interesting to make an investigator that can access the entire card pool, and see what happens. The deck building puzzle obviously becomes a lot more interesting in that case, but I bet you could make that investigator balanced through their stats and abilities. And I'm not sure. You may end up with something like Lola where nobody wants to play it, but yeah. Anyway, that's just a random thought. The blessed cards that are not in faction for her are pretty unimpressive. I really just wanted her to have access to Keep Faith at level 0. I think there are a couple of other survivor cards, like is it called Predestined? The one that is essentially what I did with Gods Be Good. So yeah, I honestly, it should be Guardian card 0 to 5, Mystic 0 to 1, 2 copies of Keep Faith, a neutral card 0 to 5. But if you get into some of the other Survivor Bless stuff, that I think that's neat. I don't know how good it is actually for her, but I do like that it's a bit flavorful. And no weapons assets. I also gave everybody in Onigawa a restriction that started. I think Sakura was the first one to get a restriction. I really didn't want you to give her guns, and so I put no firearms on her. And over time I kind of was like, well, what if we gave everybody some kind of restriction? And I thought giving Yuki no weapons was interesting because a no weapon guardian. That's kind of an interesting idea. I don't think it really is a problem for her, given her combat is so bad. She's already kind of forced down the use mystic spells to fight path. So yeah, functionally, I don't think that really does anything. Nobody was dying to give Yuki a weapon before. But I think it's a way to get some flavor in there that mechanically costs you almost nothing, because no one was gonna give her a weapon anyway, probably. I guess it does kind of rule out the dragon pole route, or some of the mystic weapons. I don't know that any of those were especially good for her to begin with. Maybe the sickle would have been. but yeah, Yuki is just not the kind of person to fight with weapons. So stick with magic spells if you're gonna fight with her. I don't know that you have to. One thing I did want to do with Yuki that I didn't really talk about was try to enable a primary cluer that was a guardian. I know Carolyn can do some cluing. I don't feel like she's. I don't like playing Carolyn, so in my eyes she doesn't exist. But yeah, I wanted to try and make Yuki a primary cluer option if at all possible. I don't know that the Guardian card pool can really support that, and even the bit of Mystic she has access to, maybe that's not enough. Maybe she needs more, but I wanted to do it without Seeker cards. And I don't know if I was fully successful, but I have heard some people have a good time with Yuki. I don't know if that's having her as their primary cluer or not. I do think you can go either way. I think she can flex. She can be a fighter. She can be a cluer. And yeah, I'm very interested to hear what people are doing with their Yuki decks and how it's going for them. My hope was that, honestly, I didn't ever really think about her being a fighter. That wasn't kind of an idea that I had for her. But just because her willpower is okay, I think she can do some fighting. But yeah, I'd be very interested to see how anyone who's running her as a cluer is getting on. Like, do you feel like there is enough in her card pool to enable that, or is the lack of access to the good Seeker cards that let you get clues just kind of make it a no-go? Yeah, let me know. I'd be interested to hear your feedback. Okay, let's get on to Makoto. So I think Makoto's signatures are conceptually strong. Porcelain Mirage, God, I love that art. I knew as soon as I saw that art that was going on a card, and it was just a matter of figuring out what that would be. I think mechanically it's a little boring. It's not the most exciting weakness. I don't think it's not cruel and pretty easy to get rid of. I mean, $4 is a lot. But you know, if your board is built, having +1 Shroud may not be a huge deal, so you could just leave it. But I think this is where kind of the vanity or shallowness, let's say, that's sort of present in the geisha concept. I think this is a good expression of it. I'm happy with it. It's maybe not the most memorable weakness, but I think it does what I want it to do, which is make you stop seeing Makoto as the strong, independent woman that she is. Just for a moment, at least. I mean, I hope as soon as Porcelain Mirage is gone, you go back to thinking that, but this is kind of a hiccup in that. And then the Infinite Oculus. This card has gotten so many changes over the year that it took me a minute to remember which version it was. This is the best version of it that there's ever been, that's for sure. I think at one point it just gave you +1 for each enemy, and now it actually rewards you, and that's kind of a mechanical implementation of like being a confidant in exchange for money. It comes from enemies though, not from your actual allies, and I don't know if I really want you to mechanically think that Deep Ones or Ghoul Priests are giving Makoto money in the middle of a scenario, but resources are not money, crucially. Resources are abstractions, which can be many things, and so I think it's probably more like information. Yeah, Infinite Oculus is an interesting card. It's hard to know how strong it is, right? Because if there's several swarming enemies at your location, then it's like the best value for money in Arkham, probably. But if your fighter is doing a good job of killing enemies, then it's doing nothing. So there's kind of a similar tension between enemies with Makoto as I feel like Trish has, which is that like Trish kind of needs enemies in play to take advantage of her ability, and Makoto is a similar way. I think Trish is better than Makoto, unfortunately, but I think I've done my best to make it worth your while to try Makoto instead of Trish. I think Makoto is a little more. They have the same stat lines, right? Or at least similar. No, Trish is like a 3-book, right? I can't remember off the top of my head, but I see them as fulfilling similar mechanical rules, I guess. So they're tangled up in my mind in that way. I guess we should also talk about Makoto's abilities. So the parlay benefit just seemed to make sense. Like I knew I wanted her interacting with enemies. Parlays are typically, well, not necessarily typically, but often interactions with enemies. They're also often book tests, so she probably doesn't need the help, but it's not. It may as well take it, right? And then her special is very. It's probably the most experimental or unorthodox special ability I've ever put on an investigator. I think in her original printing, she just gained $1 if there was an enemy at her location at the start of her turn, and that eventually got moved onto the Infinite Oculus to make it a little better. So then I needed something to replace that, and I thought, well, how can we make it less scary? Like, we've got a lot of effects that are like, it's good when enemies are around, but like, how do we make that not dangerous? And I guess maybe you don't have to. Maybe you can just say, if you get out a lot of enemies, Infinite Oculus will be stronger, but what if you don't have Infinite Oculus yet? So I wanted there to be something that sort of let you set the stage for Infinite Oculus by maybe hanging around enemies when you wouldn't otherwise normally do so, probably enabled by your above average agility. But how do we make sure you don't die while trying to do that? And that's kind of give you one free turn around an enemy where it can't engage you. I wonder how people find that in practice. Is it too good? I do worry that it might be too good to just like give you a turn where a big enemy spawns and you just have a whole turn where you don't have to fucking deal with it. I mean, that seems pretty good, but maybe she's kind of weak enough in other areas that being good is okay. Yeah, I don't know. I would be interested in some more feedback on how you feel Makoto's ability functions. Like, does it function at all? And if so, how do you feel while you're using it? Quick look at her card pool. Right. Okay. So I've gotta apologize for what I've done with Makoto's card access. So through all the investigators, obviously everyone has their primary class, and then I made sure each of the classes were one of the investigators' off classes. So Yuki's off class is Mystic, Makoto's a Survivor, Hideki's is Guardian, Kira's is Seeker, and Sakura's is Rogue. I think Survivor fits really well with the geisha concept, at least in theory. I don't know that the card pool really does, but the idea of, the geisha doing what she has to do to survive is right there. So that seemed like an obvious fit. I don't know if she actually avails herself of like old Keyring or Dark Horse, but she probably appreciates look what I found, and who doesn't appreciate some luckies and some live and learns. So I think that part of her card pool is fine. I really did a lot with the traded cards she has access to. So first, let's very briefly talk about Gambit. The sole reason she has access to Gambit is I wanted her to have access to Kicking the Hornet's Nest. if I was brave, I would have just said cards with Hornet in the title, and we would all understand what I was trying to do. I feel like she needs access to that card to make her enemy-based bonuses work, or at least I wanted to give you a way to summon an enemy at a critical moment when you were in a good position to take advantage of it, I guess. So that's the reason she has access to Gambits. Having said that, I think having the geisha be willing to engage in risky behavior, let's say, kind of does fit, so I'm not mad about that, and I probably should have just stopped there. But I had this patron idea that I felt very for some reason I felt very strongly about. In retrospect, I don't know why. I don't know why it was important to me that the geisha have patrons. I think thematically and from a fluff standpoint, it makes 100% sense, right? Like, Makoto's only allies are people that can pay her. Having said that, I don't think any of the level 0 patrons are very good. So, at least not for Makoto. I mean, you're probably taking Madame LaBranche. If you want to take, is Dario the rogue patron? I think so. Then maybe that's okay. But I think LaBranche is the best for her at level 0. I did try in the Onigawa player card pool to give her another patron that's kind of suited for her. So if you are playing with custom player cards and not just custom investigators, I would recommend taking Akane. That was my intention, but yeah, I think this was one of those ideas that I got married to early on and just was unwilling to let go of, even though it wasn't necessary. Yeah, so if you have been vexed by the ally restriction on Makoto, I apologize. I do think, in retrospect, it was a mistake, but I don't think it's not doing anything. I think it is, it is a good translation of flavor to mechanics, but I don't know if what we're getting out of that is worth what it's costing. But yeah, so all in all, a lot of conflicted feelings about Makoto and some regrets about not living up to what I see as her full potential, because I think she does have a ton of potential, and I wasn't a good enough designer at that point to really bring it to bear. Maybe we'll see a parallel Makoto someday where I get it right, but as is, I still think she's cool, and does have a kind of a novel feel to her with the whole getting bonuses from enemies things. But I feel like she could be so much more than that, and maybe someday I'll figure out how to do that. Okay, we're going long, so I'm going to speed up a little bit. Good news is I don't have a ton to say about Hideki. His signatures, his access is Rogue and Guardians. You want Guardians for vicious blows and sweep kicks and, all, and to upgrade, I guess he can't upgrade Overpower, can he? But, just the general Guardian things, and prepared for the worst, just... I feel like a lot of the level 0 Guardian cards are not just like, oh, this is nice to have. It's actually kind of like necessary to get your primary fighter going, and I wanted him to have that stuff. The tactics, I don't think any of the Guardian tactics. I think he can do without them. It's a shame that he can't stick to the plan. I feel like that would make the tactic traded cards he has access to that much better. Yeah, I think the tactics tag was really more just like that was another example of like letting the flavor and the lore kind of drive the design, which is something I am guilty of a lot, and that's a recurring theme you'll see in a lot of my designs. Is I worry less about what is balanced or good, and instead try to model the feeling and flavor of it accurately, even if doing so accurately does not lead to the best player experience. So if you don't appreciate that, I understand and I apologize. This is just the kind of person I am. This is the kind of designer I am. So yeah, if that's a problem for you, then you're probably not gonna like anything I make, and I'm sorry, but for some reason that's important to me. Also, no firearms. Obviously I did that with Sakura, to kind of, because samurai should be using melee weapons, okay? I'm not too particular on whether it's the katana from Onigawa or the meat cleaver or whatever, but it needed to be a bladed weapon. And I kind of felt that way about the ninja concept too. Like, I do kind of wish I had made like an old-timey flintlock pistol, because, in feudal Japan, there were firearms of sorts, and it's not against a ninja would use whatever tools are at his disposal, I feel like. So I don't think it's that Hideki is like above using firearms. He's not Batman, but yeah, I guess I just kind of wanted to force you into using the tools I had designed for him, like the shuriken and the katana. And yeah, so apologies if you've got a really sick Hideki gun build that I've ruined with the no firearm tags, but I don't think he needs it. I think I've given enough tools, and there are enough bladed weapons in the Rogue and Guardian pool that you don't need the guns, and people don't like using guns in Arkham anyway, so yeah, actually I don't apologize. Never mind, I retract the apology. It's taking away firearms does nothing. It doesn't change how anyone was going to build them. Okay, well, let's look at his signatures are pretty straightforward. Yeah, I didn't, once I had kind of written the lore for him about the clan that he had lost, I kind of knew that his signatures needed to be about that. They're not very, like, they could have been like a smoke bomb or something, but instead I wanted to keep it focused on his kind of obsession with restoring his clan. So we've got a pupil, and we've got the guilt over him being the only one who survived, and I like that from a flavor perspective a lot. I think that's a good set of signatures given his story. Are they actually good mechanically? I don't know. I think that Hideki's ally slot, like, you have a lot of choices ostensibly because of you have access to all the Guardian allies, so it could be a beat cop, or a Greta, or a guard dog, or any number of things. Or if you want more money, maybe it's a Gregory Gry, or if you want more access, maybe it's a Leo DeLuca. So I think it's a hotly contested slot. So I felt like, well, I need to make sure this ally is like worth your while and not just a pain in your ass like Ursula's ally signature is. And I don't think Nabiki is a himbo in the way that Jake Williams is. I think she is helping do what you want to do, which is get your foot bigger so that you can leverage the cards that let you attack with your foot, and to give you a way to evade some enemies. I do kind of think of this about Nabiki's activated ability as her, like, sacrificing herself to save her mentor, which is a bit of mechanical drama that doesn't really get rewarded because I guess just because you have to imagine those story beats when you're playing Arkham, but that's the story beat I imagine whenever you you chuck Nabiki to get out of a sticky situation with too many enemies. I view that as tragic to Hideki, and if I were really modeling the interaction mechanically, you would suffer a mental trauma when that happens, because you'd be going, oh god, not again, the only person I love is dead, and all that. I guess I should be clear, I don't view Nabiki and Hideki as having a romantic relationship. I view it as strictly professional. But if you feel differently, people working closely together develop complicated feelings all the time. But so I wouldn't rule it out. But I think at this moment, it's a purely, it's more of a father-daughter relationship than a lover relationship. But well, say no more on that, I guess. So yeah, I think I tried to make the best possible ally for him that I could, and I don't know if I did that, but I think I didn't make Nabiki a hindrance, which is, in my experience, a problem when you're making ally signatures, is sometimes you're just like, I would just prefer a better ally, and maybe you still will prefer a better ally than Nabiki, but yeah, you can always chuck her into a test if that's where you're at. Okay, Survivor's Guilt, I think it explains itself pretty much. I guess that's really why Nabiki has to be an ally, because otherwise you might make a deck with no allies in it, and then you would be in a real pickle when Survivor's Guilt came out. Coming up with a signature weakness for the ninja was pretty tricky. I didn't have a hard time with it because I'd already kind of settled on this tragic backstory, but it's hard to if you just think of a ninja concept, it's hard to think of well, what is a ninja's weakness? And I guess the comedy answer is a pirate enemy or something. But yeah, nothing kind of stands out to me as oh, this is the thing that a ninja has problems with. So I guess I feel kind of fortunate that sort of the lore happened to give me an easy out with Survivor's Guilt. It may be too... Looking at it now, I think a problem with Survivor's Guilt is that it's sufficiently mean that you kind of have to... You're sort of forced to deal with it rather than... I don't think there's any scenario in which you just let it rock. So, at that point, it may as well just say, take some direct horror if you don't have an ally asset or whatever, and not be kind of an ongoing thing. But yeah, I'd be interested to know how much of a problem you felt like it was if you played Hideki ever. Was there a situation in which you left Survivor's Guilt on the table just because you couldn't come up with two actions, and how close to death did that bring you? And did at any point you make the mistake of putting that horror on your ally and losing it, and then realizing, oh crap, I can't get rid of it now? But yeah, all in all, I really like Hideki. I think his design, out of all the investigators, is the strongest, and I have the fewest regrets about. So yeah, I feel good about those. All right, Akira. So his whole thing is dredging skill cards, and that wasn't really... That kind of came later. That was never part of the original idea for him, but once someone pointed out to me that they were having a really fun time perpetually recycling deduction, I was kind of like, oh, okay, well maybe that's his thing. And so to enable some skill recycling seemed like kind of a novel idea for him. Living Memory, I knew immediately was going to give you some kind of interaction with your discard pile, and it was just kind of going to be a question of what that interaction was and how do we do that without breaking something. And yeah, I don't know if the living memory we have is the most interesting way I could have done that. It's sort of... Obviously, having access to cards in your discard pile is good. Is, I think, worth the price of admission. But you're probably also saving your best skills with Akira's abilities. So if you're doing that, then is there going to be anything good in your discard pile to recall? I don't know. Maybe you, maybe it helps you, like, kind of, you, with Living Memory, you don't get stuck in a mentality where, like, I can only play one good skill card per turn because I can only save one per turn with it. So yeah, I, again, would be interested in the feedback about, did you feel like Living Memory was worth playing, or did it just feel to you like kind of a duplication of his special ability? Again, I feel like it's a card that is sort of, from a flavor perspective, extremely strong, mechanically underwhelming, which seems to be a hallmark of a lot of my work in Arkham, unfortunately. So yeah, I would like to have done something more interesting with Living Memory than I did. And I actually feel that way about Liminal Breach too, now that we come to think of it. Sort of the idea for Liminal Breach was like, well, talking to dead people and kind of making yourself exposed to those sorts of dark forces must have a downside, or at least it's dangerous. And so Akira's arrogance does come and bite him in the ass when he accidentally unleashes whatever this is. I think in my mind it's like the Yamada no Orochi, but that's not canon. That's just my interpretation of it, and whatever you think is going on in Liminal Breach, that's fine. Point is, something escapes the underworld due to Akira's meddling, and puts Doom into play, which is bad. I think something I didn't fully appreciate at the time when I designed Liminal Breach was the problem with weakness-based assets, or asset-based weaknesses rather, is that you can override them, or you can replace them. But so that's a little unfortunate that you don't even necessarily have to deal with Liminal Breach. You can just play a cheap spell from your hand to override it. But maybe that's okay, because you're probably going to have spells in play that Liminal Breach overwrites, and so even if you don't have to deal with getting rid of it and the Doom problem, at least it cost you some inconvenience when it trashed one of your spells that probably at the worst time, or at least after you just spent money on it. So I think sort of power balance wise, it ended up working out okay with Liminal Breach. It is, like Living Memory, highly flavorful but a little boring. So yeah, just another instance of my complete failure to design Mystic stuff well. And that's kind of an interesting comparison to Sakura, which I feel like is almost the opposite. Or actually, I think it's probably the best pairing of signatures that I made in Onigawa, both in the sense that it's flavorfully very compelling and mechanically, like, live by the sword, useful. Die by the sword, annoying. And that's what you want to do with your signature and your weakness. So I feel like I kind of nailed it on these. Maybe Die by the sword is not annoying enough. And it might be a type of weakness that you just let it rock. Like, if you're swinging at a 5 and getting a boost off your weapon, then maybe having +1 difficulty functionally to the test is not actually that big of a problem. And yeah, Live by the Sword I'm also a big fan of, because it's elegant in its simplicity, I would say. I mean, it's really just Tony Morgan's ability printed on a card, but that I feel like fully encapsulates Live by the Sword. I guess it is, at this point, I must address the other booby part of Sakura, which is this image. If you don't like this or think this is in bad taste, I get it. It doesn't bother me, and I don't think it should bother anybody else, but if you don't like it, sorry. I certainly wasn't intending to make anybody uncomfortable or annoyed at me. But yes, if you've walked away from the complete Sakura experience thinking that I'm a sicko pervert, well, you might be onto something. But it is overall not my intention to expose enjoyers of my Arkham content to my personal fetishes. So, and I don't think that's what I've done with Sakura, but I guess I understand if it feels that way to you. Okay, yeah, and then I guess we don't really talk about Mayu at all. Obviously Mayu is a recent, or Parallel Mayu is a recent addition with Return to, and I don't know that there's been enough time for me to really have a lot of interesting things to say about her, other than I do really like the idea of promoting an NPC from a campaign story to full-blown investigator after the story, and I think that's something I'm going to continue to do. It's something I've already figured out how to do with Sands of Memphis, and when and if I get back to Blood of Dracul, I am going to do something like that with that too. I just have to figure out who the NPC in Dracul is. It'll probably be Adrian, I guess, or Rosemary would be a good candidate. But to be honest, I'm not sure if Rosemary's going to survive the rewrite for Dracul, so probably Adrian, but we'll see. But yeah, in any case, I just wanted, with Mayu, I wanted to see what it would look like when she was grown up, and also give the Camera Obscura a second chance at life. Having her be kind of an evade-focused investigator is where the Fatal Frame payoff finally came for me, I guess. I don't know if Mayu is very good. Again, I'm terrible at designing Mystic stuff, so it could be the case that she's just not good, and if that's the case, I'm sorry, because I have come to think of Mayu like my daughter, so I don't want her to be bad, but I did need to pay off the Fatal Frame thing, because that was the entire reason I started on this entire project. So this was really like closing the circle for me. But I will. So yeah, I don't know if the overall Mayu concept works, but I absolutely love her weakness. Sort of imagining the alternate future in which you never went to Onigawa and Mayu escaped on her own somehow, but Miyu didn't. The idea that, I mean, the implication of Malokian Usurper is that if you had not interfered, well, we don't have to talk about this in this video. Maybe we should save it for the campaign, but the implication with Malokian Usurper is that if you never did the campaign of Onigawa, Mayu would have survived, so you didn't help, and something very interesting, what you are trying to prevent happening to Miyu would not have actually happened. Something else interesting would have happened, and I really love the idea of Miyu kind of coming into realizing her power and actually taking over Onigawa. We'll talk more about that when we get to the end of the campaign video, just to avoid spoilers a little bit. But yeah, this art for this version of Camera Obscura, that was originally the art that was used on the story asset Camera Obscura in the campaign. The current art that is being used for the Camera Obscura in the campaign, I think, is better, but I had looked at this art so long that it started to feel wrong to me that it didn't have it on there, so I'm happy that I was able to recycle it for the Mayu version. Yeah, again, I'm not, it's kind of, her design's kind of all over the place. I'm not super happy with it. I do kind of think that Camera Obscura maybe should have been a permanent, but then I was like, what I found myself feeling when I was designing Mayu, I was so annoyed that Daryl existed, because I really just wanted to make Daryl, and it was very hard not to. And so I tried something else, and I'm not sure if what I tried really ended up working. But it did get me this, and honestly, I love this so much that it's kind of worth the price of admission. But yeah, if you play Mayu and it doesn't go well for you, I'm sorry, and I'd be very open to hearing any feedback on ways to make her better. She definitely probably needs another pass. But yeah, okay, that was 2 hours just talking about the investigators, which is crazy. I thought I would get through all of the investigators and the player cards in half that time. So why don't we cut this here, and this will become a 3-part video. And next time I talk to you, I will go over some of my thoughts about the player card pool. And then when we're done with that, I will move on to the campaign. So thanks for watching, if you stuck out through all this, and I'll see you in part 2.